Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes? Matt here with YoVideogames, and I'm back with a little more real talk from my recent trip to Japan, and one that I think that most people on this channel are probably going to find very near and dear to their heart, and that was my trips through the Kawasaki Warehouse, which was a themed arcade in Japan that, as of the publishing of this video, has just now closed its doors forever. This is not because the arcade scene is in dire straits in Japan, and in fact, there were many arcades that were still very packed when I was there. However, I am to understand that the arcade business is winding down in Japan, but obviously at a much slower rate than the complete death of it that we have here in America. But either way, the Kawasaki Warehouse, which was a themed arcade, is closing apparently more from landlord disputes rather than the fact that nobody was going there. And indeed, when I went to my trips to Japan, we went on both a weekend and a weekday, and it was packed on a Saturday, and it was still pretty busy on a weekday that I went in its final weeks of operation. So what exactly was the Kawasaki Warehouse? It's probably something you might have heard of or seen an article on the internet on in the past recent decade or so, and it was an arcade with a very extremely cyberpunk theme going for it. It was based on the walled city of Kowloon in Hong Kong, which, if you've ever got a moment of time to spare, Google this up, read some articles on the history of Kowloon, the walled city in China, which was an off-the-grid, I guess you could say. It used to be a fortress that was basically taken over by squatters and then built up and became one of the most densely populated areas of the world. It's a fascinating history in real life, but it was demolished in the early 90s. Now, this arcade was themed to look like Kowloon, sort of a mix of both Kowloon and just general cyberpunk aesthetics, a la Midgar and Final Fantasy VII, to get very general. What made this unique, though, was that it wasn't trying to be something that was super fancy or super clean or something that was, vacation destination. It was basically the antithesis of, a Disney World or Disney Resort that you could possibly get. As you can see, it actually had 3 entrances on the ground level. It had a sort of themed handicap accessible entrance through 2 sliding doors. It had a handicap accessible entrance through the parking garage, and it had a completely not handicap accessible entrance through the garage that went through a pretty cool area that looked a lot like the pit area from Mortal Kombat 2. But anyways, I'll go down bit by bit. This was a 5-story entertainment building. It was kind of sort of an amusement center. When you think arcade, you might just think, it's got a bunch of arcade machines, and that's true, but it also had a lot more to it, so that you could easily call it's an amusement center, closer akin to something of a miniature golf course with the amount of stuff it had. The ground floor was just a themed walkthrough. If you've ever been to an amusement park during Halloween, you might have gone through one of the walkthrough mazes, as they call it, where it's just a very highly themed walkway. And that's the bottom floor. It has a whole bunch of sound effects going on. It has, a lot of lighting and wiring that kind of just probably goes nowhere. That's just made to look like the Kowloon walled city. There's a window that shows a room that's meant to look like one of the brothels from Kowloon, complete with a mannequin on a bed, and it's very detail oriented, so you can kind of just peek in the window, take pictures of it. And that's just the first floor. The first floor is just a sort of walk-through theme, get you into the vibe of the atmosphere. It plays like some environmental haunting music that's very appropriate for the area. The second floor was where most of the arcade machines were. Now, the second floor had this open plaza area, which is where the main kind of theming of the Kawasaki Warehouse really took hold. That's where most of the pictures come from. It's got this very vertical second floor up to the 4th floor is completely wide open in the one area. And it was very, very accurately themed. It was very gritty, very grimy, very dark. It had posters that were pasted onto the wall that were actually pulled from the real city of Kowloon before it was completely demolished. So it had just all kinds of gritty theming going on. The center plaza area had tables to sit down at. It had arcade tables. It had some of the more up-to-date games and a lot of really old classic games. Like you would find a classic functioning machine of Space Harrier and Outrun and Radmobile here. but you would find newer stuff like Mario Kart Arcade 2. There was an area that had a bunch of DDR machines and Star Wing Paradox, which you might have heard me talk about before. It had like the Pac-Man Battle Royale, and it had a couple shooty hoops basketball games. So sort of like the more bigger social games were out kind of spread around the Central Plaza area. Going around back there, you would get a long section that was all claw machine games. They were all in this middle section going towards the back. And at the very back end of the room was just rows and rows of the sit-down style arcade cabinets where all the fighting games were. That's where you found pretty much all that stuff. There was not a lot of music rhythm games, but they were on one area kind of on the side, going with the DDR machines and going down one wall. You'd find all the sort of rhythm games. But anyways, the back end was where all the fighting game cabinets were, and they were all on sit-down cabinets, and that's where you could get a real honest-to-God experience of playing fighting games against other people in the arcade, and it was a wonderful experience, and I'll get back to more of that. Going up to the third floor, there was a section where it had a whole bunch of classic shmups, vertical, horizontal scrollers, shoot-'em-up games, some classic games like Ghosts and Goblins and stuff. So either very old or mostly just old-school shmups games on the third floor. And you'll notice on the third floor, it's a little nicer theme, like things are a little bit designed to be a little cleaner, a little more classy, and then besides the one area that was all classic shoot-'em-up games, it was all pachinko and betting machines, and it was all very smoky because that's where most of the smoking crowd goes. And weren't allowed to take any pictures or film anything on the area of the third floor that had pachinko machines because that's actually illegal. So there's nothing really more to say about that. The fourth floor was interesting because you get up to the fourth floor and there's this busted old Greek statue, like giant Greek statue of like Greek-looking gods, and it's a little like broken off and stuff, like it's like Poseidon and his trident tip is missing and stuff like that, but it's like very clean. It's almost like the higher you ascend in Kowloon, the nicer it gets, because the more whatever you could call upscale or whatever you could call more privileged people who lived in Kowloon would live at the top. At least that's the idea this arcade is presenting. But anyways, on the fourth floor, it's all games that are not digital or how to say ping pong, darts, pool, like billiards. It's all that stuff. All the social, not board games, but more like active, involved games. Things that involve you, doing stuff. However, also on the fourth floor were all the machines for Gundam Extreme Versus 2 and Tekken 7. So the current day, most modern fighting game Extreme Versus games were put on the fourth floor right at the top of the escalators, and then the rest of it was all for ping pong, for billiards, for dart, lots of dart games. They even had a really cool dart game that was based on House of the Dead. So as you threw darts at the board, there would be a little like screen above the dartboard that showed zombies from House of the Dead, and like when you would hit the dartboard, the zombies would react as if they were getting shot by a bullet, and like correctly, throwing the dart where it's supposed to go would like blow off a limb. Pretty neat idea, I thought. Now, there was also a fifth floor that was only accessible from the elevators, and it was a completely different theme almost. It had like this sort of fancy Panzer Dragoon carved stone look to it with these really fancy stained glass windows when you first got onto the fifth floor. And the fifth floor was a very quiet floor. It was reserved for basically people who just wanted to chillax. There's a small cafe up there. There was a newsstand area, which was like a sort of like a meeting room with just a bunch of current day magazines and newspapers all over the wall. And then there were 2 internet cafes on each end of the top floor. And the internet cafes are crazy because they're basically giant cubicles. And inside the cubicles, you actually had little cots you could fold down off the wall and you can rest on. So if you just wanted to take a nap, you could rent an internet cafe cubicle and just take a nap for a little while. And the weird thing is that the internet cafe, the fifth floor area, is open, or I should say was, because this arcade is gone now. It was open 24 hours. So the first floor, the themed walk-around area, which was pretty small, but still pretty cool. And the fifth floor, they were 24 hours, whereas the second, third, and fourth floor, they actually had normal business operation hours. Also on the fifth floor was a giant manga library, bigger than any manga section you see at any bookstore in America, but just huge area. And the bathrooms up there were like super fancy and clean. And when I say bathroom, I should clarify that the bathrooms, there's no bathrooms on the first floor, but the second floor is these super dingy, straight out of a dystopian future style bathrooms on the second floor, and then the third floor bathrooms were like, they're kind of normal, third and fourth, and then the fifth was like, if posh millionaires kind of looking back. So they themed it, at least that staggered, is the higher, like whatever level you were on, the cleaner and nicer the bathrooms were. It was super weird to see how the bathroom and on the second floor was so meant to be just disgusting. Like the sink for washing your hands was a big trough, and then there was just these metal pipes with little metal spigots, and you would just twist the spigot and then water would just dump out of a pipe into the trough, and the soap was just bars of soap in these like plastic nets, and you would just kind of like rub your hand on it. It was intentionally made to be gross, and I don't know how to describe it. It looked like an even grittier version of the bathroom from Street Fighter Alpha 1 where you fight Birdie, to put that in context for all you fighting game people. So that being said, it didn't feel unsafe. I should say that, like, it definitely had that theme park atmosphere to it where, like, okay, it's definitely meant to be grimy and disgusting and kind of like a little bit creepy, but it's only in a theme sense. I mean, you could tell when someone was working there, they had employee uniforms and stuff like that. It wasn't so crazy dingy that you were afraid a knife fight was going to break out somewhere. No, never anything like that. It sold its theme very well, and you were immersed in it, but it wasn't scary. And probably one of the greatest takeaways from this whole experience was the arcade experience, classic arcade experience I got to encounter while I was there. One of the nicest things about Kowloon Arcade was that they had a fully functioning couple of Virtua Fighter 5 Final Showdown machines, and there was no Soul Calibur there, so I was like, okay, I'll play Virtua Fighter. And I kind of got into it. I got to play, for a while I was just kind of playing myself. And then on the Saturday I was there, I actually got to play a good number of people at Virtua Fighter 5. I got, built up Eileen a little bit, got comfortable with playing that character. And there was even a point where I went through a row of like 4 people and won each one. And then a little later on, I got down and there was a 5th entry or contestant, I guess you could say, and we were going out and we were pretty evenly matched, and it was pretty great because the arcades are split where you don't really see who you're facing because they sit back to back. And the nice thing is that Chaoser got a lot of footage of me playing against other human opponents, and there was this great moment where I had a run which about first to 3 on Virtua Fighter 5, and it was against this one guy who was playing with Sarah Bryant, and I was playing with Eileen, and we just got at it, and it was down to the wire, and it came down to 2 rounds wins apiece, and we were really close, and then I was barely able to clutch a victory out. And then it was super nice because the guy came over and like he shook my hand and he thanked me for the games, but then he was just like he was like gave me a little and I'm damn you, I wish I could have won like that last one. And it was just this amazing experience that you don't get anymore, because as much as online is important and is vital to a fighting game's success nowadays, you don't have that one-on-one human interaction anymore. And then there's plenty of stories even recently about how violent it could get in arcades, and yeah, that's absolutely true. That's also a part of it as well. But we're also missing out on all the good times of going and fighting an opponent and getting close, and then being able to meet someone new, and then in this case shake their hands and thank them for the great matches and stuff like that. And what a great experience that we don't have anymore in America, because whatever arcades we do have now, they don't even have fighting games. There's 0 fighting games. They don't cater at all. They cater specifically towards prize redemption machines almost entirely nowadays, and the most you get is some sit-down racing games and some House of the Dead games, some light gun shooters. You don't have these competitive one-on-one games anymore. So there's no chance for such an encounter to really occur, even at the current level of what we have here in America. So, but if you do live in America and you do want to have a great arcade experience, I gotta throw out Go to Galloping Ghost Arcade if you're anywhere near Chicago, because you can get the real deal arcade experience there. Probably one of the last places in America you can get such an experience. But in Japan, there was a lot of arcades still. Some of them big, some of them small, some of them some of them, very old and smelly, with smoke and cigarettes, and some of them much more clean and kept up. But none of them compared to what I experienced at the Kawasaki Warehouse. None of them were themed like this. None of them were really themed at all. Even the big Sega ones didn't really have any theming going on. Like, this was something special. I'd be curious if there were any other functioning themed arcades in Japan still, because this was the equivalent. If you were an arcade person like me and you loved the arcade experience, this was the equivalent of going to Disney World. This was like going to Galaxy's Edge, going, somewhere like that. Toy Story Land, I guess, if you're really young. But, if you're a kid, you should not be watching this channel at all, period, ever, any point. So, yeah, this was Disneyland for the arcade kid in me. And I'm really sad that it's gone, and I took as many pictures and we filmed as much as we could. Me and Chaoser tried to document as much as we could before this went away forever. There was even a cool thing during the last months where they had this live augmented reality game where you could go and you could buy this Professor Layton-like kit full of maps and puzzles, and you would go around the arcade, and there were these specifically made clues and things that were put on the walls and in corners, and you had to take this detective kit and go around and find all of them and solve some riddle or some puzzle. And yeah, that was cool. They do that on the metro train as well, for the winter months in Japan. But here they had their own special version by the arcade for the arcade, and all of that's gone now. And it's sad and depressing, but I am glad I was able to capture this arcade in the last weeks of its operation. And hopefully this is one dystopian future that will not be forgotten. And let me know what you guys think, and I will see you on the channel. And later, dudes.
Simmons having some really good matches in Virtual Fighter 5 Final Showdown. Yeah, they be going back and forth for a while. Although by back and forth, I just mean so far Simmons is 3-0. Oh man, his new friend might get him on this one. Oh yeah, oh, it ain't over, it ain't over. Nice. Oh no. Oh, power knee. She knows those tiger knees. Oh, toe tapping over here. Sweep the leg, Johnny, sweep the leg. Oh, gotta watch out for them flying knees. Oh man, throwing them out. Oh, yeah, there he goes. Yeah! Good games, yeah! There we go, some good games right there, man.
Japan, right?
I know, right? Japan, what can you do about it? All right.